I heard it through the vent. Not even a direct hit. Just a drifting sentence filtered through floorboards and carelessness. I was in the laundry room, folding towels that weren't mine anymore, when her voice carried down from the kitchen above. She said it like she was brushing off crumbs. "She's not family anymore." There was a small clink of silverware, a pause, and then laughter, not from my son. He stayed quiet. Maybe he nodded. Maybe he turned away. I'll never know. I stood very still, my hands pressing a washcloth flat on the dryer, and I remember the texture of the terry cloth more than the rest of the afternoon. I'm Mary Carson, 72, and that was the moment I knew I had overstayed where I was never welcome. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks. That vent has always carried more than warm air. It carried my son's whispering when he was little, sneaking into the kitchen for cookies. It carried my husband's cough when he was dying in the guest room. And now it had delivered a truth I didn't ask for, but needed to hear. I stayed, quiet, finished folding, put the towels into the linen closet like I always did. So the ones with the navy trim went on the lower shelf, guest towels on top. I kept order even in moments that were breaking me. That's just how I've always been. Quiet, useful, easy to miss. That evening, I set the table. For plates. I didn't ask who the fourth was for. Some friend of theirs, one of the loud ones, who never quite looked at me directly, as if I might ask for something. Dinner passed without anyone mentioning the afternoon. She smiled at me like a cashier might, all lips and no eyes. My son talked. About traffic and some promotion he might be up for. I passed the potatoes dot the whole time. Her sentence played on loop in the back of my mind, like music you can't turn off. She's not family anymore. I don't think she knew I heard. That's the kindest version of the story. But the truth is, I don't think it would have mattered much if she had. That's how invisible I'd become. It wasn't one thing. Not a single moment that changed everything. It was years. Tiny cuts, misplaced coffee mugs, silence during birthdays, Christmas gifts left unopened in the corner. My cooking replaced by Uber Eats. It was all of it and none of it. When my husband died, I moved in because they said it was temporary. Just until I could get my bearings. I never asked to stay. I always offered to leave. But the years dragged on and no one said no, not out of love, but out of convenience. I became the house ghost, present, polite, forgotten. There were little signs, the shift in how she said my name clipped like something sharp in her mouth. The way she used to text me, "Thank you," then just stop texting at all. How she'd look through me when talking about the future, their future, as if I wasn't seated across the table, my son. He tried, in his own way. But he was tired. And men like him don't like ripples in their lives. He thought love was letting me stay in the guest room. He thought that was enough. But a room is not a home, not when you're made to feel like a burden inside it. That day after dinner, I went upstairs to my room, not really mine, of course. I sat on the bed and looked around. Everything in that space had been rearranged at some point without asking. My books boxed. My chair moved. To the garage, even the little lamp I brought from my old place was replaced with something sleeker, whiter. Her taste, not mine. I opened the bottom drawer of the dresser. That's where I kept the folder, deed copies, a marriage certificate, my savings account numbers, things I didn't want to lose in someone else's house. I put my palm over the papers, flat and firm. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the sound of my own voice, and I said it soft and steady just once. "You're not family anymore either." Then I slept, peacefully, strangely. Like the silence had finally said the thing I'd been avoiding for years. I didn't cry. I just breathed, slow and deep, like someone coming up for air after too long underwater. The next morning I made breakfast just for me. Toast, 1 egg, black coffee. No one noticed. They were in a rush. Meetings, car keys, drop-offs. I watched, from the edge of the kitchen while they buzzed around me like I was a piece of forgotten furniture before I left. I walked to the front hallway. There it was, just as it had been for the past 8 years. A brass plate on the wall that said the Carsons. I took it down, quietly. No drama. Just a screwdriver and a firm grip. It came off easily. So did I. It wasn't always like this. There was a time my name meant something in a room. When I spoke, people listened. When I laughed, it echoed. I was the one who made the holidays happen, who sewed the hems, who packed the school lunches just right so nothing got soggy. There was a rhythm to my life, not glamorous, but whole. And it was wrapped up in a man named Harold and a boy named Daniel. I met Harold at a church picnic when I was 19. He had a dimple in one cheek and a quiet way about him that made me feel safe before he even said a word. He didn't talk much, but he always showed up with his hands, his silence, his steady breathing beside mine at night. We weren't passionate in the way people talk about in books, but we belonged to each other down to the bones. When Daniel was born, everything got a little brighter. He was soft and round and loud in all the ways his father wasn't. I remember holding him in the hospital bed, still swollen from labor, and thinking, this is what I was made for. Not a career, not a crowd, just this. It's just him. We didn't have much. Harold worked at the post office. I did alterations from home, hems, wedding dresses, zippers that had gone off track. People trusted me. I kept things neat, clean house, fresh bread, a boy who always had what he needed. I was proud of that. Daniel grew up polite, thoughtful, smart without being arrogant. He loved science. He used to explain gravity to me with little drawings on napkins at dinner, always saying, "Mama, you get it, you get it." And I did, even if I didn't. I loved the way he wanted me to understand him. Fad mattered more than the facts. When he went off to college, I felt something tear a little, but I stitched it up with phone calls and care packages. He never asked for them, but I sent them anyway. Socks, peanut brittle, notes in the margins of newspaper clippings. I thought he'd like Dot. Then he met her. Her name was Claire. She was tall and glossy, the kind of woman who never had a strand of hair out of place. When I met her, she shook my hand like a contract, firm and quick, and said, "It's so nice to finally meet you, Mary." I remember thinking finally was an odd word to use. It's like I'd been some kind of obligation. But I smiled. I always did. Because I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be the kind of mother-in-law who wasn't in the way. I told myself to be gentle, to give. Her room. And at first, things were fine. She'd come over for dinner and bring a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce. I'd make pot roast. She always picked at it, like she was looking for something hidden. I'd ask if she wanted something else, and she'd say, "Oh no, I'm just not much of a meat person." But she never looked me in the eye when she said it. Still, I tried. When they got married, I helped sew her veil. She never thanked me. But I told myself gratitude doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it's just being allowed near. They bought a house 2 towns over, big kitchen, long driveway. Claire picked everything. That's what Daniel said, like it was something he was proud of. I came over to help unpack boxes, but by then it was clear I was only welcome in certain corners. The kitchen was hers, the bedroom hers, decisions all hers. I found myself sticking to hallways and side chairs, asking where things went when I already knew the answer. Then Harold got sick. It came like a thunderclap. One ordinary Tuesday. He'd been out trimming the hedge. Came inside, short of breath. I made him sit, poured water, dialed the doctor. Lung cancer, stage 4. No warnings, no gentle slope. Just the drop. Daniel helped where he could. Claire didn't come much. Said hospitals made her nervous. I didn't judge. Was too tired for that. I just wanted Harold to feel safe, to be held. And when he passed, 2 months later, in that too bright hospital room with the window that wouldn't open, I felt a silence crawl into my chest that never really left. After the funeral, Daniel said, "Why don't you come stay with us, Mama? Just for a while." Until things settle, I said no at first. I didn't want to be a burden, but then the nights got longer. The house felt too big, too full of echoes. And I said yes. I brought one suitcase, few boxes, my sewing machine. I told Claire I'd be out of the way. She smiled and said, "Of course, stay as long as you need." But her voice was already turning the welcome into a lease. Time passed. I cooked when no one asked me to, cleaned things that weren't mine, babysat the neighbors' kids when Claire had meetings. I became helpful. That's how I kept my space, by being smaller than I used to be. Years blurred. Claire stopped calling me Mom. Not that she ever said it much to begin with. It became Mary, then nothing at all. Just glances and nods and the sound of her footsteps walking past the door. Daniel stopped asking how I was sleeping, stopped sitting with me at breakfast. Work, he'd say, always rushing, never landing. I watched him turn into someone else, thinner, quieter, his smile a little crooked, like it no longer fit. I never asked for anything. Not a title, not a favor, not even affection. I just wanted to matter to someone, to him. But little by little, I faded, like a chalk drawing in the rain. And nobody stopped to notice Dot until that afternoon with the vent, until I heard her say it, and I finally understood. I was never meant to be part of their story. I was just a footnote they forgot to erase. The betrayal didn't come in a dramatic blow. No slammed doors, no screaming matches. It arrived quietly, sealed in an envelope, placed on the hallway table like junk mail. I almost didn't open it. It had my name, but the handwriting wasn't familiar. A flat printed label, no return address. I brought it to my room and used a butter knife to slit it open along the top. I still remember how the paper felt thin, like something copied too many times. Inside were 2 pages. The first was a letter from a lawyer, formal, cold, addressed to me as Mary Carson, residing at their address as a guest. Is that word? Stopped me guest, like I was a visitor passing through. Like the past 8 years hadn't happened. Like I hadn't mended their curtains and bathed their dogs and refilled the sugar jar every Sunday morning. The letter said they were transitioning the home to better reflect the current family unit, that arrangements were being made to ensure I had plenty of time to relocate, that I would be given respectful notice, that I would not be responsible for utilities during this process, as if that were a gift. The second page was a list of recommended senior living facilities, each one circled in red ink, each with a little note in the margin. Clearly Claire's handwriting. Close to the supermarket, she wrote, "Beside one, offers shuttle service." And next to the last one, "This one takes pets, if she still wants a cat." I didn't cry, I just sat with it. Hands trembling, but my breath steady. My chest felt hollow, like something had finally fallen out. After years of holding it too tightly, I reread the phrase, transitioning the home, the way you'd say you're remodeling a kitchen, not removing a person. I kept reading, again and again, letting the words sink into every pore, every memory. The same hands that tucked in Daniel when he had fevers, the same hands that held Harold's during his final breath, holding a letter that asked me to pack and go. I put the letter back in the envelope, tucked it into the folder with the deed copies and my marriage license. That folder had become my quiet armor, full of things that proved I'd once had a place in the world. Later that night, I noticed the small changes they'd already made. My sewing machine, which had sat by the window in the spare room, was gone. When I asked about it, Claire said, "Oh, it's in the garage now. We needed the space for Daniel's office." Daniel didn't say anything. He was on his phone, scrolling. The living room photos had changed. 2. Once there had been a picture of Harold and me holding Daniel at his graduation. I noticed it was gone, replaced by a canvas print of a vineyard they visited last year. My face, quite literally, taken off the wall. That weekend I checked the bank app I rarely used. My name had been removed from the shared utility account, the one I used to pay the water bill when I first moved in. Just one more piece of the puzzle gone without a word. It was death by 1,000 deletions. I saw it in the way Claire said things like, "Oh, I already texted the group," meaning a dinner I wasn't invited to. In how Daniel would walk past my door without knocking, without even pausing. In how their friends stopped greeting me like someone with a name. She's not family anymore. It echoed louder now. Not just a sentence, a mission. I once would have asked why, pleaded, maybe. But something inside me had already started letting go. I began observing instead of participating. Watching how quickly they moved on with the plan. How naturally they cut me out like a smudge on glass. Even the dog had started sleeping at their door instead of mine. It was the mail that sealed it. Really, one morning I opened the mailbox and saw that a magazine I subscribed to, one I had been receiving for years now, had a yellow sticker across it. Forwarding address needed. Recipient no longer resides here. I brought it inside, placed it on the kitchen counter. Claire saw it, gave a tight smile. "Oh yeah, change that. I figured you'd want it to follow you to wherever you end up." Wherever you end up, she said it like I was already gone. Like I'd already packed. Like my life had already ended and I was just waiting for someone to tell me. I stared at her. Really looked, and she blinked once, then twice, then turned away. It was a slip, a brief human crack in her polished veneer. But it told me everything. She wanted me gone, not just out of the house, out of their story, out of the record. She wanted a clean page, one where I had never existed. Daniel ... I don't know what he wanted. Maybe peace. Maybe to avoid conflict. Maybe he told himself I'd be happier somewhere else. That he was doing me a kindness by not making it ugly. He never handed me the letter, never looked me in the eye and said, "This is what we're doing." He let her do the work. That was the worst part, not the leaving, not the erasure, but the quiet approval of it. The way my son folded himself so neatly into her choices like they were his own. That night, I pulled out my old notebook. The one I used to jot things down in when Harold was sick. Medication schedules, doctor names, grocery lists. It still had his handwriting on the first page. Little note he wrote me once. "Don't forget, you're the glue mare." I touched the ink, my fingers shaking. Then I turned to a clean page and I started writing. Names, numbers, storage unit locations. Friends who still had couches. My lawyer's name, still listed in my contacts under wills and things. It was time not to fight, but to remember I still had choices. I wasn't waiting for permission anymore. I stopped answering to my name. Not out loud. Not in a way that would cause trouble. But inside where it mattered, I stopped flinching when Claire said Mary with that clipped tone. Like she was scraping something off her shoe. I stopped thinking of myself as her guest, his mother, her problem. I started thinking of myself as a woman with hands that still worked, lungs that still drew breath, and a mind that hadn't gone soft, no matter how long they'd treated. Me like I was fading. The notebook became my quiet rebellion. I started waking earlier than usual, 4:30, sometimes 5. I'd sit at the little desk in my room before the sun lit the curtains and plan. Nothing dramatic, no grand escape. Just the small things that added up to something bigger. I made a list of everything in the house that was mine, truly mine. My sewing machine, my winter coat, the jewelry box from my wedding day. I had so few things, and yet they felt heavy with meaning. Each one a piece of a life I had tried to carry into this place without taking up space. I noted what I would take, and what I would leave behind. That part hurt more than I thought it would. The Afghan on the couch. I made it to Christmases ago, but Claire said it didn't match the aesthetic and folded it into the guest closet. I decided to leave it. Let them keep the warmth they didn't want. The little porcelain dish in the kitchen I used for my tea bags. Leave it. I hadn't made tea there in months. But the nameplate. The one by the front door that read the Carsons in gold serif lettering. I circled that on my list. That was coming with me. I also called the storage place on Route 12, a small facility but clean, quiet. The man who answered the phone called me ma'am and explained the monthly rate without rushing. I told him I'd be by at the end of the end week. He didn't need a reason, just my name and a card. The power in that surprised me. How easy it was to start again. You just had to decide. I made appointments. Library, to renew my card, Social Security office, to update my contact address, even if I didn't know yet where. I'd land. I called an old friend I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, Margie Weed. Lost touch after Harold passed. She lived 3 towns over and ran a quilting group at the church. I said, I'm thinking of getting back into the rhythm of things. She said, honey, we've saved your seat every Thursday since 2016. I hung up and cried, not the loud kind. Just a few soft, stunned tears that felt like warmth after too long in the cold. Then came the hardest part. The bank. I had my own account. I always had. Harold insisted on it. Said a woman should never lose track of her own name, her own money. But over the years, some things blurred. There was a small savings account Claire had helped Daniel set up for household costs. I had added some inheritance money from Harold into it when I first moved in to help. To contribute. So I didn't feel like dead weight. I checked the balance, lower than I remembered. Lot lower. There were charges I didn't recognize. Furniture delivery, spa services, home goods, over and over. Claire's favorite stores. The purchases were months old. I'd never been asked, never informed. Strained slowly, till the cushion I thought I'd left them had deflated into something close to insult. I stared at the screen, not angry, not really, just done. I made a transfer of the remaining funds into my personal account. Then I called the bank and had my name removed from their account entirely. The woman on the line paused when I explained. Said, "Are you sure, ma'am?" I said, "Yes. I've never been more sure." That night, Claire came into my room the first time in weeks, she said. The bank called. There was a flag on one of the accounts. I looked up from my notebook, said nothing. She waited, arms folded like she was posing for a courtroom photo. She asked, "Was that you?" I nodded once. She didn't shout. She didn't accuse. Just narrowed her eyes, a small curl at the corner of her mouth that almost looked impressed. Then she said, "Well, I guess that's how it's going to be then." And I said, "Yes, I suppose it is." She left without another word. Daniel never came in. Not that night. Not the next day. I think he thought if he stayed quiet long enough, it would all settle back the way it was. But it didn't, because something in me had clicked, like the moment a locked door gives way. I had stopped waiting to be seen. I had stopped asking for kindness. And once you stop asking, the silence loses its teeth. I wasn't looking for revenge, just room to breathe without shrinking, room to sleep without apologizing, room to matter, even if only to myself. That week, I started packing. Not big boxes, just the essentials. A duffel bag. 1 suitcase. The file folder with my name written across the top in Harold's old handwriting. I'd zip the bag up in the morning. I'd unzip it at night, changing my mind about what to bring. A sweater. My mother's comb. A framed photo of Daniel as a toddler, muddy and laughing. I almost left it behind. But then I thought, no, not because of him. It's because of me. Because once I had joy. Once I held a life that made me whole. And I was taking that with me. I left on a Tuesday morning, just after sunrise. Not because I planned it that way, but because that was the only time the house felt empty. Quiet enough for me to slip out without performing gratitude one last time. Claire's car was gone. Daniel's briefcase was still in the hallway, meaning he hadn't left for work yet. But the bedroom door was closed, and I didn't need a goodbye. I walked softly. Each step was careful, like I was tiptoeing out of a memory that didn't belong to me anymore. I had packed the night before. Everything I needed fit into 2 bags and a grocery tote I'd saved from the farmer's market. The one I used to visit before they started ordering everything online. The nameplate was wrapped in one of my sweaters. At the bottom of the duffel, the brass felt cold in my hands when I unscrewed it. Cold and surprisingly heavy. Like it had absorbed all the years I spent trying to belong. The hallway was lit with that pale light that comes just before dawn. Soft, forgiving. I paused by the coat rack. My winter jacket still hung there, though someone had pushed it behind a pile of Claire's scarves. I reached past them gently. No need to rustle or wake the house. I slipped my shoes on by the front door, taking care not to let the heels tap against the tiles. I didn't want echoes. Didn't want anyone calling out to stop me, even if they wouldn't. I didn't want any scene to sully the clarity that earned in silence. I opened the door and stepped out. Just like that, I was no longer theirs. The air was crisp, still summer, but the kind of morning where the trees know what's coming. I pulled the coat tighter, adjusted the bag over my shoulder, and walked down the steps without looking back. A taxi waited at the curb. I had called it the night before, using the old flip phone I kept tucked away for emergencies. The driver was young, kind eyes. He didn't ask questions. Took my bags, held the door open, and started the meter. "Where to, ma'am?" "Route 12. "Storage," I said. "Then the bus station." I had already moved some of my things there earlier in the week, little by little. I'd borrowed Daniel's car twice, each time saying I had errands. No one asked where. No one really noticed. That's the gift of being invisible. You can slip away without a ripple. The storage unit was small, 10 by 10, but it held the parts of me I couldn't carry all at once. My sewing machine, Harold's toolbox, the quilt I made the winter. After his death, things with edges and weight and meaning. I had labeled each box in pencil, soft, erasable. I didn't want permanence, just order. The driver waited as I slid the last bag into the unit. I looked around one last time. The metal walls, the smell of dust and cardboard. It felt like a waiting room for my past. I locked it gently, double-checked the number, and tucked the key into my coat pocket. At the bus station, I bought a one-way ticket to a town 2 hours north. Small, quiet. I had passed through it once with Harold on the way to visit his cousin. There was a diner with pink curtains, thrift store with a porch swing, little library, enough to start. The ticket clerk smiled when she handed it. To me, I wanted to tell her what I was doing, what I had just done, but I kept it to myself. Not everything needs to be announced. Some victories are better whispered while I waited. I took out the envelope again, the letter from the lawyer, now folded and creased from being read too many times. I'd brought it not out of bitterness, but because it reminded me of the exact moment the ground shifted. Proof that it wasn't just in my head. I read it one last time. Then I tore it, slowly into 4 long strips. Folded those in half. Slid them into the bottom of the trash can beside the bench. Covered them with a napkin. I kept the nameplate, though it sat in my lap as the bus pulled up. I ran my fingers over the letters, the Carsons. Still smooth, still polished, still trying to mean something. But it didn't anymore. It's not the way they intended. It's not no longer named a home. It named a story. Mine. On the ride out of town. I stared out the window. Watched the houses pass. Watched the coffee shops, the hardware stores, the places I once thought I might be a part of again. I felt grief, yes. But not the drowning kind. The kind that moves through your chest like a warm tide, slow, heavy, but cleansing. There was a smallness to it, an honesty. I wasn't running. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was simply returning to myself. At one stop, a woman in her 60s got on, sat beside me without asking. She carried a tote bag with embroidery thread sticking out of the top. I smiled. She smiled back, going far. She asked, "Just far enough," I said. We rode in silence after that. But not the cold kind. It was the kind of silence I'd missed. Gentle, shared, not expectant. I didn't know what would come next. I had a room booked for a week in the little town. After that, maybe an apartment, maybe a job, part-time. Didn't need much. I'd lived with so little for so long, yet always carried too much. Now I wanted less. less noise, less pretending, less of the ache that comes from waiting for someone else to remember you. As the town came into view, the bus slowed. The pink curtains of the diner fluttered in the wind, just like I remembered. The street was quiet. One man walking a dog. Bike leaning against a fence. The driver called out the stop. I stood, collected my things, took one last look at the nameplate in my hands, and smiled. It was no longer a symbol of belonging. It was a souvenir from a place. I'd survived. The messages started on the third day. The first was a voicemail from Daniel. His voice was tight, uncertain, like he wasn't sure if he was calling his mother or a customer service line. Hey, Mom. Just checking in. Claire said she thought maybe you went to stay with a friend. Give me a call when you get a sec. Yeah, just want to make sure you're all right. I listened to it twice, then I deleted it. Not out of anger, but because it didn't feel like it was meant for me. It felt like it was meant for the version of me they remembered when I still folded their laundry and set the table in silence. That version was gone now. Later that afternoon, a text came in. Daniel, did you take the nameplate? I didn't reply, Claire. Was next. Hers came at 9:12 p.m., 2 words only, real mature, no greeting, no question. Just a judgment from someone who never thought I'd actually leave. The next day, Daniel called again. Then again, 5 missed calls in 24 hours. He didn't leave another voicemail. Just rang once, twice, then hung up. I imagined him pacing the kitchen, standing near the place where the nameplate used to hang, wondering if I had left because of that letter or because of something else they couldn't put into words. By the 5th day, the tone shifted. Daniel's next text read, Mom, please, just let us know you're safe. I read it in the grocery aisle between a tin of lentils and a pack of butter cookies. My new life wasn't dramatic. It was rows of shelves and clipped coupons and a cashier who called. Me, Mammon smiled with his whole face. I put the phone back in my coat pocket and chose the cookies. Later, I checked social media. Claire had posted a photo of their living room, newly redecorated. Neutral tones. Straight. Throw pillows. A caption that read, New beginnings, new energy. One of her friends commented, Love the clean lines. Another added, Where did your mill go? Claire didn't answer, but Daniel did. He replied, She's taking some time for herself. We support her journey 100%. I laughed, not cruelly, just quietly. That odd, dry laugh that comes when someone tries to rewrite your story in real time, like you can't still feel the bruise. They didn't support my journey. They didn't even know it existed. They just wanted the hole patched up fast enough that no one would ask too many questions. On the 6th day, a letter arrived at my motel. It was forwarded from the storage unit. I'd used their address until I had a place of my own. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Claire's, rounded, controlled. Like every letter had been rehearsed onside a single page. Mary, we're confused and a little hurt by how things happened. We thought we were supporting you, giving you a home when you needed one. If you felt pushed out, I wish you had told us. Also, some of your items are still in the house. Let us know where to send them. Claire, no signature from Daniel. No mention of the lawyer's letter. No apology. Just the vague shape of concern. Wrapped in careful distance, I folded the letter in half and set it beside the bed. Then I sat back and stared at the ceiling for a long while. I thought about the years I had poured myself into that house. The dinners, the babysitting, things I did not because they were expected, but because they made me feel useful. Seeing useful can be mistaken for loved if you're not careful. And now, suddenly, I was neither. That night, I opened the motel. Room's little drawer, the kind they all have, with a Bible and a notepad. I took the pad and wrote 2 words in big, slanted letters. I'm free. Then I crossed it out. Then I wrote it again. Smaller this time, neater. Like I believed it. I didn't answer Claire's letter. I didn't respond to the messages that followed. Increasingly anxious ones from Daniel, shorter and more clipped each time. By the 2nd week, the tone shifted again. From concern to confusion to blame. You could have just talked to us. You didn't need to disappear. This has been really hard on Claire. I imagined them spinning, wondering if someone else would find out. If anyone from the church would ask why I wasn't sitting in the pew anymore. If someone from Daniel's office would notice the way his voice tightened when someone mentioned family. They had underestimated the kind of damage silence can do. Because when someone like me, someone they thought would never leave, never speak, never claim space, finally chooses to vanish. It says more than shouting ever could. In town. People didn't know who I used to be. I was just Mary, a woman renting a room near the diner. Someone with a kind smile and a quiet way of pushing her cart at the grocery store. No one asked about my son. No one expected me to cook or clean or apologize for existing. I was just me. On day 15, I turned my phone off. Not out of cruelty, out of kindness. For myself, it buzzed a few more times before the screen went black. I left it in the motel drawer beside the notepad, and I walked into the soft evening light. Into a world that no longer owed me anything and no longer expected me to beg. I rented a room above a bookstore. It wasn't much sloped ceilings. A window that stuck in the frame. A twin bed that creaked when I rolled over, but it was mine. No one else's hand had picked the curtains. No one else's toothbrush sat beside. Mine. I could breathe in there. The landlady, Edna, was 79 and ran the shop below with a kind of quiet pride I recognized. She didn't ask many questions when I first arrived. Ton just handed me the keys and said, "Tuesday's trash day and the hot water needs coaxing." She had a cat named Church who lived like he owned the whole block. He started sleeping at the foot of my bed after the third night. I never invited him. He just knew. I started helping around the store, not because she asked, but because I liked the feel of old pages and stories shelved neatly. There was something soothing about alphabetizing lives, organizing other people's mess into order. It reminded me of my sewing days. Careful, quiet, useful. By the second week, Edna handed me a little envelope with $30 inside. "Just a thank you," she said, slipping it into my hand like it might burn. I didn't argue. I tucked it into my coat and later used it to buy a second-hand kettle and a tin of lemon tea. Small things made me feel whole again. On mornings, when the light poured through the cracked glass just right, I'd sit on the windowsill with my tea, Church at my feet, and just listen to the sounds of life below. Shop bells ringing, buses sighing at the corner, the barista 2 doors down singing softly to herself. No one called me Mary Carson from the guest room. No one called me anything, really, except Mary from the bookstore. And that was enough. One afternoon, a little girl wandered into the shop while her mother browsed the mystery section. She stared at me from behind the counter, then whispered, "Are you the lady with the cat?" I smiled. "I suppose I am." She reached into her coat and pulled out a crumpled drawing, stick figures and a gray blob with whiskers. "That's you," she said proudly. I hung it behind the counter. That evening, I cried in the bathroom. Quiet, careful tears. The kind that come not from pain, but from the gentle surprise of being seen. Edna and I fell into an easy rhythm. She made soup on Sundays and insisted I take half. I stitched the tear in her cardigan one evening without being asked. We didn't talk about the past. She never asked why I left or where I'd come from. I think she knew it didn't matter. She once said some women grow bitter when the world stops seeing them. Others grow invisible and free. You look like the second kind. I didn't answer. But I think I smiled. Each day felt like a quiet reclamation. I started carrying a notebook. Again, not the one from before. A new one. Soft cover. No names scribbled inside. I wrote lists in it, not of tasks, but of small victories. Monday, remembered how to sleep past 6 a.m. Tuesday, laughed out loud. Blown for no reason. Wednesday, didn't think of them once between breakfast and lunch. Healing didn't look like what people say. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like learning how to exist without waiting for someone else to approve it. Like letting yourself eat what you want for dinner, even if it's toast and apples. Like noticing a cloud shaped like a boat and not feeling silly for staring at it sometimes. I walked to the park bench near the library just to sit and watch the world spin. No need to offer help, no need to be useful. Just being was enough. A woman named Rosa started sitting beside me some mornings. She had a bag of birdseed and a thick Spanish accent. She told me stories about her husband, long gone, and the bakery. She used to run before her knees gave out. We didn't talk much about sadness, but we both knew it lived under the surface. Like a soft bruise, we didn't need to press on to know it still ached. Once she said, "You got the look of someone who survived a war no one saw." And I nodded because there wasn't anything else to say. I didn't tell her what Claire said, or what Daniel didn't say, or how many nights I lay in that guest bed wondering if kindness had an expiration date. Some stories don't need to be told in full. Sometimes it's enough to just share the silence. I found a second job, part-time cleaning rooms at the motel. Up the road, not glamorous, but steady, predictable. I liked the way I could make a bed so smooth the world looked right again, at least for a little while. I liked the hum of the vacuum, the clink of folded towels. I liked being paid for my time, not my tolerance. On payday, I bought a small flower pot from the corner shop. Clay chipped on the side, painted it blue, and planted basil in it. Set it on the windowsill next to my kettle. Each morning, I watered it with care. I whispered to it sometimes, without meaning to. "Grow, little thing. You're allowed to grow." Now, no one knew where I was, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel lost. I felt found by myself. In the creak of floorboards above the bookstore, in the warm purr of a borrowed cat, in the way my name sounded in my own mouth when no one else was around to twist it. It wasn't grand, it wasn't revenge, it was a quiet, persistent joy, and it was mine. The letter came in late October, folded into a pale blue envelope with no return address, but I knew the handwriting before I even opened it. I would have known it blind, the slight slant of the D, the heavy pressure at the bottom of the G. Daniel had written this one himself. I sat at the kitchen table in my little room above the bookstore. The radiator hummed beneath my feet. Church? The cat snored softly beside the flower pot, now full with the smell of new basil. I held the letter for a long time before I opened it. He began with my name, not Mom, not Mother. Just Mary. Then he crossed it out. Then again, underneath, he wrote, "Mom, I think I owe you that. To the very least." He wrote that Claire was pregnant, due in February. Didn't say whether they were happy, just that it was happening. That the baby would be a girl. That Claire wanted to name her something modern and bright. He wrote, "I think about you more than I know how to say. The house is quiet without you. Claire says it's peaceful, but I hear the difference. It's the kind of quiet you don't choose." Then he tried to explain. He said they didn't mean to make me feel unwanted. That the lawyer's letter was a formality Claire insisted on. That he had hoped it would feel more like a gentle nudge, a soft change, not the erasure I'd taken it as. Taken it as, like I had misread it, like kindness had been hidden somewhere inside the word guest. Then came the part that almost made me fold it all up and forget I'd ever opened it. He wrote, "I guess I didn't realize you still needed space that was yours." And I just sat there, reading it again, letting those words settle. Still needed. As if that need had an expiration date. As if a woman stops needing dignity once she's done raising a child. As if love is something you give out and then surrender like an empty dish. He asked if we could meet. Said he'd drive up alone. No Claire, no pressure. Just to talk. He included a phone number, not his old one, a new one. Maybe Claire didn't know he sent it. I didn't call. Not right away. I needed time. 3 days passed. I went about my little routines, dusted the bookshelves downstairs, folded the motel sheets in tight corners, watched Church chase his own tail by the radiator. But something had shifted. His letter had stirred up an ache I buried, a question I didn't want to face. Did I want to see him? Would it bring peace or reopen the wound? In the end, I called. Dada's voice cracked when he answered. Said hello. Twice. Like he couldn't believe I'd actually dialed. I told him he could come. One time, just to talk. He asked if I needed anything, and I almost laughed. But I said no. I said just bring the truth. He arrived that Sunday. Edna let him in downstairs and pointed him to the narrow staircase. I stood at the top, unsure what to expect, my son or a stranger. When he reached the door, we just looked at each other for a moment. He had new lines around his mouth, a nervous stiffness in his shoulders I didn't recognize. We both grown older in the silence. He looked past me into the room, the kettle, the chair, the folded blankets, and said, "This is you now." I said yes, and I didn't apologize. We sat facing each other. Hey, on the little bench. Me on the WINDOWSILL. He said, "I don't know where to begin," so I began for him. "You let her remove me," I said, piece by piece. He looked down. "Think I was trying not to lose you completely," he said. "You were still there in the house." I thought that meant something. It didn't feel like I was there, I told him. Not in any way that counted. He nodded. He didn't try to deny it. And that meant more than I expected. He asked about my life now. I told him about Edna, about the shop, the quiet joy of folding towels for strangers. It's the way the basil caught the sun in the mornings. He said he was sorry, not just for the letter, but for the way I was made to feel so small, that he hadn't seen it until after I left, that it took my absence to notice the shape I used to fill. I asked him if Claire knew he was here. He said no. I asked him if she'd changed. He didn't answer, but silence tells the truth better than words sometimes. He stood after a while, took a small envelope from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. "For the baby," he said, "case you ever want her to know who you are." Inside was a photo of the ultrasound. It's a blurry shape floating, becoming. I looked at it. I didn't smile, but I held it for a moment, then handed it back. "Tell her if she ever asks that I wasn't a guest," I said. "Tell her I was your mother." He looked at me like he didn't know whether to cry or hug me. He did neither. Nodded once. Sharp, solemn, at the door, he turned. "You're not coming back, are you?" "No," I said, "but I forgave you anyway." He left, quietly, down the same stairs he'd climbed, shoulders bent slightly, hands in his pockets. I stood by the window until his car pulled away. Then I poured the kettle, fed the cat, and folded the envelope he'd left into a neat square. I didn't keep it, but I didn't throw it out either. I slid it into the bottom drawer beneath a dish towel. A reminder, not of him, of me, of the line I drew and the piece I found on the other side. The basil on the windowsill has started to flower. Tiny white buds, soft as breath, curling open like they trust the air now. I didn't know it would do that. I thought it would stay small, leaves only, rooted and simple. But it had other plans. Some things do. The bookstore closes early on. Sundays, Edna goes to church, and I sit in the quiet with a cup of tea and church asleep on my lap. It's the kind of silence I used to fear, the kind that reminded me I was alone. But now it feels different. Not absence, but space. I'm not lonely, not in the way people expect a woman like me to be. I've already done my time in rooms full of people who didn't see me. This small life is honest sometimes. I pass the thrift store and see things that look like pieces of my old home. A dish pattern like the one Claire gave away without asking. A coat shaped like mine, only in a brighter color. I don't stop to touch them. I don't need to own anything to remember who I was, and I don't need proof of what I walked away from. I used to think survival was about staying, about bearing it, about shrinking yourself enough to fit into someone else's version of family. I used to think silence was grace, that if I just held on longer, kept cooking, kept folding, kept agreeing, maybe I'd be seen again. Maybe they'd remember. But love that needs reminding isn't love. It's obligation dressed in prettier words. One morning, Edna asked, Me why I never mentioned my children. She wasn't being nosy, just curious. Soft around the edges the way older women are when they recognize pain in each other. I told her they live somewhere warm. Not the weather kind. She nodded like she understood, then handed me a cup of coffee without cream. Just the way I take it now. I no longer explain myself. I no longer rehearse my worth for people unwilling to hold it gently. Some stories aren't meant to be understood by the people who cause them. Some are only meant to be told once you're safe enough to speak. My story is quiet. But it is not small. It lives in every bed I make at the motel, each corner tucked so tight it could hold a secret. It lives in the books I shelve, in the way I slip handwritten notes into the margins for readers I'll never meet, reminders like "you matter" and "keep going." It lives in the way I answer to my own name again, not as someone's mother or guest, but as Mary, 72, who still wakes up early, but not because she's expected to, who eats toast for dinner if she wants, who remembers what she survived without bitterness, only clarity. I wrote Daniel one last letter, folded it neatly. Number, tears, no explanations, just truth. I told him I forgave him not because he asked, but because I needed the room. I told him I hoped his daughter would grow up to see women fully, not as caretakers, not as placeholders, not as shadows in their own homes, but as people, whole ones. I didn't sign it, love. I signed it with peace. Then I placed the nameplate on the riverbank. It had sat on my dresser for weeks, wrapped in flannel. I didn't want to throw it away in a bin, didn't want it to sit among eggshells and receipts. It had held a name once. It had marked a door, a life, a lineage. But it didn't belong on a door anymore. Not theirs, not mine. I walked to the edge of the water just as the light began to fall gold over the trees. I bent down and placed it gently on the stones, not tossing, not burying. Just letting it rest. The Carsons. Still legible, still gleaming. But no longer mine to carry. I stood for a long moment. Long enough for the cold to bite at my fingers, for the world to tilt toward evening. Then I turned and walked back to my room, my breath steady, the ground sure beneath me. There is no grand ending. No dramatic music. No arms flung open at a door I once knocked on too many times. There is just me, waking, choosing, living, and the last words I speak into this recorder. As the red light blinks soft in the corner, are not for them. They're for the woman I once was, the one who stayed too long, who swallowed too much, who whispered her needs in empty rooms. I see you now, and this time I decide who gets to call me anything else.